to take you back to your law beginnings, and we wanted to ask you what made you decide to become a lawyer and tell us about your law school experience.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. I think it started with my parents. I think throughout my childhood, I noticed my dad was a minister, my mom was a teacher, and I noticed that their careers were meaningful and that they had an important impact on a lot of people's lives. And then I noticed in our church and our community that lawyers did that same sort of thing. They seemed to be the people who helped others when they were in trouble, when they had a need. And so, based on lawyers in my community, I grew up in Fayetteville. I decided I think I'll do that.
And I was listening to you talking, I knew you were from North Carolina. And so uh, you grew up in Fayetteville. Tell us about law school.
Well, I went to law school at UNC after going to college at Wake Forest, and went to law school thinking I'd go back to Fayetteville and practice. I was looking forward to practicing with a legendary trial lawyer in Fayetteville who is in criminal defense practice. And he died while I was in law school. And he had sort of mentored me towards the profession. And so I looked for someone I thought embodied the values that he had and had the type of trial practice he had, and decided to come here to Raleigh and practice with Wade Smith. And that changed everything for me.
And you're leading into another question I have. I'm going to go ahead and ask it. You say Wayne Smith, and you talk about this other man down in Fayetteville. Talk to me about, through your career, the importance of mentors and mentorship back then, and then you as a mentor now.
Well, I think mentors are crucial. And so, one word of advice I try to give to law students or young lawyers is find someone or find several lawyers who you think embody the type of values that you value and watch the way they practice law. Wade was a tremendous mentor to me in my firm and really taught me how to approach law, how to approach life as a lawyer. But I'm grateful to lawyers that I watched in depositions and in court throughout my time as a young lawyer, just finding mentorship in the other more senior lawyers around me, admiring and watching how they dealt with witnesses, how they dealt with court personnel, how they dealt with each other, their opposing counsel, how they dealt with their clients. And I think you watch that and find things that help you develop your own way of practicing law.
Take us through your career. So, what year did you graduate law school at UNC?
Sure, I graduated in 1987. Wanted to go straight into law practice. I was just eager to get out and do it rather than a judicial clerkship. So I came straight to Raleigh, joined the firm that was then known as Tharrington Smith and Hargrove. Knew I wanted to do either criminal defense or civil litigation as a trial lawyer. Did both for about 3 or 4 years, and then decided to go into civil litigation. About 5 years into practice, I became an associate when John Edwards and David Kirby started a law firm together. I was their first and only associate to start with. We needed more, but I was the one for a while. And that was a great opportunity to work with great civil trial lawyers. And then when John went into politics, David Kirby and I became law partners and had a law firm for a long time. And then I concluded my career in law partnership with David Sherlin. And so my career mainly consisted of representing individuals and families, a lot of children who had catastrophic injuries in personal injury litigation and medical malpractice litigation.
Wow, hearing the list of all these folks, these legends at our bar that you've worked with and you've been with your whole career, that's amazing. And so you've seen a lot of the North Carolina legal community and the Raleigh legal, Wake County legal community evolve and change through your career. Can you tell us about that? That change?
Sure. When I was a young lawyer, one of my favorite things was going to calendar call at the courthouse. doing that in criminal district court, doing that in civil district court. Then as my career advanced, doing that in superior court. There was such great collegiality in the Wake County Courthouse among the judges, the lawyers, and it gave me as a young lawyer an opportunity to interact with other members of the bar. I hope we still have that same collegiality, but so much, and then that developed in my civil practice into attending a lot of depositions, having several trials along the way, more depositions than trials, and getting to interact with other lawyers from around the state. And that collegiality was wonderful. Some of my closest friends in law practice have been my opposing counsel in cases throughout the years. And I admired the work that they did. I hope they admired the work that I did. And I hope we don't lose that collegiality now that depositions are done more by Zoom. I don't know how calendar calls are handled now since I've retired, but I think lawyers gathering together as a community is important. And I know we do that in bar associations, like the Wake County Bar Association and the North Carolina Bar Association and specialty bars. But I think our gathering as a community of lawyers is important, and I hope it's still as important as it used to be.
And talking about going through these years, the technology and its impact. So take us back, when you started and moving us through all the changes you saw.
Well, a lot of the changes came near the end of my career. As a lawyer who worked in civil trial practice, that meant a lot of depositions, and so a lot of travel. So my career, I spent several days each week, either in another part of North Carolina or maybe another part of the country, doing depositions of expert witnesses and others. And I think that's changed now. And again, in many ways, that's for the better. That's certainly been one of the changes. I think as my career has advanced, law has become more, each lawyer's practice is a little more narrow in focus. I was really fortunate when I joined the Tharrington Smith firm that I was one of only a few young lawyers they had at the time. So I got to work with all the partners in the firm doing all kinds of legal work. And that was good for me to start my career that way. I think one of the changes I perceive is that lawyers coming straight out of law school go straight into an area of practice. And so I hope new lawyers are able to find their area of practice and change if they need to. But the practice has become more narrow in its focus, I think, of each individual lawyer.
Yeah, for sure. Tell us about ethical dilemmas that you faced in your career. How did you deal with ethical dilemmas in your career, and what would you tell a younger lawyer coming up on how to deal with ethical dilemmas?
Ethical dilemmas, I would say the thing that's most important about our ethics as attorneys is that there's nothing more valuable than that we have as an attorney than our reputation for truth and honesty. It's required of us, and we just have to be mindful when we're dealing with other attorneys, when we're dealing with the court, when we're dealing with our clients, when we're dealing with the public, that everything we do and say is truthful completely. And sometimes that means having to correct the record. If a witness testifies to something that we know is not accurate, it may not have been intentionally untruthful, but ultimately the litigation process is a truth-finding process. And it's up to us to make sure that even as we vigorously fight for the rights of our clients, that we make sure that everything we do and say and that our witnesses do and say is truthful. Because once that reputation for honesty is lost by an attorney, it's very, very difficult to get back.
That ethical dilemma is one that lawyers often face in their career. Another thing that lawyers really face all the time is case management and the busyness and the workload. And how did you manage that?
Well, in my practice, it was a small number of relatively significant size cases, and it could be overwhelming at times. Lawyers can become victims of their own success within their firm and within the legal community. In other words, a successful lawyer is going to be referred more and more matters. And I think lawyers have to be very careful to have enough staff to back them up, have enough lawyers in their firm to make sure they can get the work done, but also set appropriate boundaries between the work and your personal life. The practice of law can take a lot out of a person, I think lawyer well-being is something that has definitely progressed as an issue during my career in terms of being openly talked about, particularly within bar associations and I hope within law firms as well.
And that leads me directly into my next question. Tell me about your life outside the law through these years and the importance of that.
Well, I would say I didn't set as good of boundaries as I wish I had, which caused me to retire a little earlier than I had planned. I just felt so dedicated and worried about my clients and my law practice that I probably gave my career more of myself than I should have. And I can say that now, looking back with the benefit of hindsight. I think younger lawyers now do a better job than my generation did at work-life balance. But I certainly made time for my family during that time. After retiring early, around age 62, I have loved doing volunteer work, doing pro bono clinics, doing volunteer work in the community and through our church. And so I wish I had done more of that as I went along rather than loading it at the end. But I would encourage any lawyers of any age not to lose themselves in their law practice, to keep a vision of personally what they value in terms of their personal time and life and hobbies and things like that. But sometimes it's hard when the weight of the law practice is heavy.
Yep, absolutely. And that you are not alone in that answer. So I want to ask you, because you're so knowledgeable of the legal profession in our state and all that, where do you see the legal profession in North Carolina and in Wake County and where do you see it going?
Well, I think the biggest issue in terms of where it's going right now, or one of the biggest issues, may be artificial intelligence. I was meeting with some law students earlier this week, and I asked them, I said, what are law students worried about now with regard to their career? And the first answer was AI. I didn't experience AI in my career, but it's now we're all experiencing it throughout our lives. And so I think the legal profession, just like every profession, is going to have to evaluate how it can be used effectively, how it can be used ethically, and how it should not be used. But I was told by these law students that they're being assured at the law schools that AI is not going to replace them, but it's certainly going to impact their careers significantly. There are lots of other ways that the future of the law practice are going to be affected, but that one's kind of front and center right now.
And so that kind of, you mentioned the law students, that leads me to my last question. What is your best advice for new attorneys? Like if you or even thinking back to you said 1987 itself, like what, graduating law school, what would you tell him and what would you tell these lawyers now?
That's a great question. I think that I would tell them to make sure they find a place to practice, whether it's a firm or in-house counsel or in government, a place where they enjoy and respect the people they're working with, that they like the kind of work they're doing, and that they feel a passion for it, but that they not let that passion extinguish their personal interests and their personal journey. I just think that the law is a wonderful career to go in, and I would wish them well and tell them to remain hopeful about the practice of law, to remain hopeful and diligent about the rule of law. It's certainly under threat in our country, and I think it's going to be up to young lawyers to really protect our future in that regard. And so I'm excited for their future and wish them well.